We, Jonn? Please join me on stage. Tell us a little bit about your kind of background then, your history, how you kind of, how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I graduated some time back. I wouldn't say when. I'm not as young as I look. But, and I actually started my career as a management consultant. So I started off with what I would say they consider us a big three. So Bain & Company was the company I joined, and I joined it in Singapore. And I also worked in London as well. So I spent half my time in London, half my time in Singapore with Bain. And at some point, Rocket Internet came knocking, and it was an opportunity that was too hard to pass because I always liked e-commerce. It was always the passion of mine. So when Rocket Internet came, they wanted to build companies like Lazada. They wanted to build companies like Zalora, like Foodpanda, like Home24. And it was always a passion of mine. So I decided to take the plunge, leave Bain and join Rocket as part of their Zalora's co-founding team. And I was there for just over a year, and it was a pretty crazy year, I would say. It was back in 2012, and that was when e-commerce really started growing and booming. And after I left Zalora, I joined Photobook as I would say a fairly young CEO, and I've been there for just over 4 years now. Yeah.
So tell us about, so Zalora, you've admitted to me that you're not the most kind of the fashion guy. That's kind of not really necessarily an avenue that you thought you would be going down. How did that come about then, that you ended up co-founding what is now a fairly famous fashion brand?
Yeah, I always joke that I dress a lot better now than I did when I was in Zalora. But yeah, I mean, I knew nothing about fashion, to be honest. But I like e-commerce, and I'm quite a numeric person, right? So I like numbers. So for me, it was never about what I was selling, but it was whether the economics of what I was doing actually worked. So even before actually there were a few choices, at Rocket. I could have done Lazada very easily as well, but I started looking at some numbers, and I knew that fashion was a much higher margin product, right? So I did a bit of research, understood that I kind of had the 3 golden rules to myself when I was looking at e-commerce. The first golden rule was the margin high enough, right? So looking at fashion, the margins are typically 30 to 50% in terms of gross margin, compared to electronics, which was about 5 to 10%. So that was one box that I ticked. The second box that I wanted to check was whether the product was light enough to ship. Because if the product was too heavy to ship, like for example, if it was furniture, then it would be difficult. So yeah, clothes and shoes are generally quite light. It's quite easy to ship. So that was another box that was ticked. And the third thing that I wanted to tick was to check whether or not the value of the product was high enough. And looking at the products that we were selling, it was generally, on average about 100 ringgit. And that was large enough, We were not selling like, China-made accessories and things like that, which would have been too cheap. So the 3 boxes checked, and I decided, yeah, fashion was the right thing to do, and I joined. I mean, in hindsight, I think Lazada would have been more interesting, but the 3 boxes checked for me, and that's why I joined Zalora. But yeah, admittedly, I didn't really know much about fashion, but it was the numbers that kind of worked for me.
Was there any kind of doubt then? Did you ever kind of think, maybe this industry isn't perhaps for me?
Not really. I mean, to be very honest, fashion is quite exciting. All my friends were very jealous because every day we had like 10 to 20 Russian models that were in the company all the time, modeling for us and stuff like that. They're all very jealous all the time, but honestly, I was just behind my laptop most of the time. But it was very exciting, and I think that what I really liked about e-commerce was the fact that it was actually it was a very numbers-based industry. You were just dealing with numbers every day. How many people were on the website? How many people were buying? What were they buying? How much were they spending? It was all very live data. And I'm quite a data-driven person. I really like data, so that really worked for me. I think industries like fashion, people will think, oh, Jonn, are you just looking at dresses and shoes and deciding what to buy and deciding what to stock and what not to stock? I was like, not at all. We actually just look at spreadsheets all the time. We just look at Excel all the time and say, okay, what's moving, what's not moving, how much stock do we have, how much dead stock do we have, and decide what kind of discount levels we should be going based on the inventory that we have. The discount thing is really based on how much stock we have left. In some cases we just made a mistake. We bought too many of this particular shoe, and we had to do a fire sale, and that's it. You don't get emotional about it. You just look at the numbers and you let the numbers decide for itself. So that was how it was kind of ran, and to me that was the part that I really enjoyed. Just looking at spreadsheets every day.
But you were only very, very young at that age. You were what, 25, 26 when you co-founded what is now. I mean, everybody in the street, you guys have all heard of Zalora, right? Like it's a very famous fashion brand. I mean,
hopefully, we also do men's stuff. So not only the women should know. I mean, they do men's stuff too. I mean, they do all kinds of stuff today. Even baby, even men's stuff. And actually, as we did our research, like men's shoes were moving one of the fastest. I guess men are quite lazy to go out shopping. And to them, size 7 is size 7. Doesn't matter whether it's size 7, 7.5, UK 7, 8, whatever, as long as they can. So men's shoes were doing very well. So, but yeah, I was very young. I mean, admittedly, I was very, very young. I mean, maybe too young. Yeah, I was only like around just turned 26, 25, 26.
So what was your kind of attitude at that time then? You're being asked as a 26-year-old, I want you to, rock it, this big company that have all these brands underneath them, come to you and say, we want you to be the guy to help us co-found this new brand, Zalora. Was there any kind of part of you that went, yeah, I can, what were some of those kind of early challenges for being so young, and what was your kind of attitude around that kind of time?
I would say it's just, when you're young, you're just going for it. You don't even know what you're doing. Sometimes you just go for it, right? And I think that was the attitude a lot of us had at that time. It was intense. I think that it was deliberately intense. It was made to be intense for us. And I guess the rocket model was like, hey, this young guy, doesn't have a kid, doesn't have a family. He can probably work 100 hours a week, and we did. We worked 100-hour weeks. Throughout my time in Zalora, I was averaging 100 hours a week. We were working from maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. And I would joke that we would normally have our half-day meeting at about 8 p.m. That's like, when some of us would go down and have a drink maybe and say, okay, there's a half an hour break at 8 p.m. And the second half of the day actually begins at 8 p.m. And we would do until we would work until 3, 4 a.m. usually. And then we would do 6 days a week, right? So that was like the average kind of lifestyle for someone who's part of the co-founding team. So it was very intense, I would say. But I would say it's also very, very stressful, right? And I think that with that kind of stress, it changes your character, I would say. Yeah, and I think that at some point, you just realize that maybe you're not the same person anymore, right? You are staring at the computer screen for 18 hours, 20 hours a day, and getting all kinds of numbers to be achieved, and you're just building your team so fast. When we started at around 50, 60 people, they were kind of the early guys. Within 4 months, we had 300 people, 300 plus people, some of whom I don't even know, right? So that's pretty scary in a way, right? You just start bringing all these people on board. And a lot of people that we brought on board, were short-termists, right? They were also thinking very short-term. We were also thinking very short-term. So when you bring a group of 300 people who all had a pretty short-term mindset, you can imagine what kind of stress levels that can be, because everyone was just thinking for themselves at that point, right? They were not thinking for, the future. They were not thinking, what are we going to do for the next 5 years? How do we achieve our goals in the next 5 years? They were just thinking, okay, how can I survive the next 5 weeks? Right? Everyone's just thinking, how can I survive the next 5 weeks? And yeah, a lot of firefighting.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you felt like it changed your character a little bit, and that you'd kind of noticed all this. If you look back now, a few years later, what kind of things would you say now with slightly more experience under your belt to that kind of 26, 27-year-old Jonn who was there, maybe dabbling into some slightly more interesting character traits?
Yeah, well, I'm not calmer these days. I talk a lot slower. Or maybe I still talk a bit fast sometimes. But, it's just a different, I think that environment brought out a different side of you. And I think that's very, honestly, that I think happens to everyone. When business is going well, you may be going through a slightly better phase. You're more relaxed, you're happier. When business is tough, I was like 26 years old, and you were, Rocket would say, okay guys, you're over budget for this month. I want you to cut 10% of workforce, right? And yeah, and then I had to go and, fire people. And no one taught a 26-year-old how to fire people. You just have to start bringing them in one by one and then say, okay, sorry, I have to let you go. And the guy's like, I have kids. I'll be like, well, I'm sorry. Right? You kind of learn to park your emotions aside, right? You kind of learn that, I have no choice. And then it makes you feel like, it makes you feel bad for maybe half an hour, and you say, okay, it's partly my responsibility, right? If I ran the business better, maybe I could have avoided, this guy, being fired. And so there is an element of self-blame, I would say, maybe half an hour, 1 hour. And then you snap out of it and say, okay, life goes on, let's move again, and let's try and grow again, and that's it. So very intense. But I think today is very different. Today, we're really building, at Photobook, we're really building a long-term business, and we really just grow from strength to strength, and really all about laying the foundations of becoming a really big company in this region. So there's a lot of long-term strategies that go into place. There are a lot of, once you weed out all the short-term mindset, things kind of just click, right? You kind of think, okay, I shouldn't be thinking about what I need to do over the next 4 weeks. I think about what I need to do for the next 4 months and next 4 years. And then things start getting a lot more manageable, and you start thinking like, you start becoming a lot calmer, and you start thinking for the future. And I think that is to me a very, very big difference. Mm-hmm. And the way we run the business today is very much about thinking for the future. How do we achieve our goals in the next 5 years, 10 years? And we built the foundation, the pipes to actually make it happen. So that to me is extremely powerful. We still work hard, we still move very fast, but we do it with a much more long-term mindset. Yeah.
So when you joined Zalora, I mean, obviously you were going through the initial stages, getting it off the ground. You were there right from day one. You then come into Photobook, and it's already 4 years established at that point. I mean,
8 already at that time.
It was 8 at the time. Oh, okay. So how was that kind of going into that transition then of going into something far more established, coming from that, like you said, very short-term mindset, very focused on short-term goals. Now suddenly here you are entering something that's already its own baby.
Yeah, it's a shock, when you're in one environment, people are thinking very short-term, right? And then on the other side, when I was at first at Photobook, people were thinking too long-term. People think, I love this company so much, I want to die with this company, I want to work here for the next 50 years. And I'm like, well, let's think about the next 5 years first, right? So you got super extreme ends, right? So yeah, I think that it was a very, very different skill set. Admittedly, it was a very different skill set. It was all about change management. It was all about changing mindsets. It was all about really also creating a culture of change in a business. It was all about creating all these change agents, creating catalysts for change. So a lot of it is around that. And at the same time, really creating this whole, beating the drums of battle, I would say, creating an environment where, hey guys, yes, great that you're thinking for the next 50 years, but you know what? The next 5 years is going to be a big battle in Southeast Asia and a big battle in the major markets that we're in. So let's get our act together, let's beat the battle drums, and let's start going, let's start moving. Right? So that is not so easy, because people will be like, nah, I don't want to, I don't believe that. I think that we're doing okay. Let's not listen to what Jonn says, right? Let's do it our way, right? So there's a little bit of that, and I think that is always difficult when you're parachuted in from at a senior level, and you have to start off make these changes. But as long as you can one step at a time, right? I always say that you create all these goals that you want to achieve even within a 12-month period. And as you achieve them, you celebrate success and you make the change. And then as you achieve them, as you achieve more, you make more changes. And you keep doing that again and again. And suddenly you create a real culture of change, and then it starts moving. And today we've got a full-blown change cycle, and then things move really, really fast, right? So it's not overnight, unfortunately. But yeah, it can happen. With a lot of willpower, it can happen.
It must be a lot easier, though, to kind of take something from day one and form a culture from start, rather than kind of take something that's already well established and now try and mold it into something else.
I think it's again, it's different, right? I mean, you basically, if you're doing very early stage, then you kind of have to do a lot of different things that's very, very basic, like even like company forming and all those kind of things. Then you start thinking, well, this may not be the best. While it's interesting, it's not honestly, it's nothing glamorous about doing this kind of stuff, right? It's just very mundane, very administrative stuff that has to get done. Whereas if you're in a more established business, you're just building on foundations that have already been built for you. Like all these things are already in place. You've got HR in place, finance in place, everything's already in place. And you just have to optimize and do better. And so I would say it's pros and cons. Yes, you can really dictate things a lot better when you're starting something. But at the same time, you don't benefit from the foundation, the strong foundations that perhaps have already been built for you, right? So I would say it really is pros and cons. I wouldn't say one is necessarily easier or more fun than the other, but I would say that, at different stages of my career, I wanted to experience different things, right? So, at some point I wanted to learn how to start something. At some point I want to learn how to run something. And at some point, I want to learn how to run like a listed company or run $1 billion company, right? So, I think that, there are different skill sets involved in many different things. And, sometimes you can achieve everything with one company, sometimes you can't. And, I think that those are different stages of business building and growing businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you ever, do you think you'd go back to kind of the founder mentality and starting something up again, or is it kind of been there, done that, or do you think you'd go back to that?
I don't know. It really depends on which side of the bed I wake up on sometimes. Some days I wake up and say, oh, I want to start something. I feel so excited about, and then on some days I wake up and say, oh, okay, no, not really. So, but I think that the mindset is there, right? I feel that it doesn't really matter whether or not and I don't think that founding something or starting something really has to be from scratch, right? When we have, at Photobook, when we have great ideas, we start something within the business as well, and we start new things, we start new products, we start, new business lines, we start new brands, and we start new models, new business models. That can all happen within the company itself. It doesn't have to be I have to leave a company to start something, right? I can always do it where I am, and it's all about the mindset. If you believe that you can do it within the company, then you can. If you believe that, no, I can never do it within a company, then you can't, right? So I think that it's all about the mentality that we have. And the mindset that I have is that a lot of things that I want to do and all of things that I want to start, actually can be done even within where I am today. And that's the kind of mindset that we also share with a lot of people that are within the team and say, hey, if you really believe in something, you want to start something, yeah, you can start. How can it be relevant to the business? How can you grow it? It's all part of that, founder mentality as well.
So what would be some of the lessons then you would bring forward? Obviously, you've done it before with Zalora. If you were then to try something new, what would be some of the kind of the key things that you've learned? Okay, now I've learned from my successes and failures in the past. Now, if I would start something new, I know I would do blank.
Yeah, I think that building the team is extremely important. I think that is true for almost everywhere I've been. The first hires or the first I would say the first 10, 20 hires are sort of the most important hires that you can ever make in starting a business. And I would say as you grow a business, the hiring still continues to be one of the most important aspects. And it continues to be one of those things that I'm really passionate about, that I really do a lot, because I really believe that, in starting something, finding the right partners and finding the right team is extremely important. And that is something that I still hold very dear. I mean, I've personally done more than 2,000 interviews in my life, just on a consistent basis, even and even to today, every week I would probably do like 5 to 10 interviews. Back in those earlier days, I would be doing 20 interviews in a day. So I think that it's still such a passion of mine, because I really believe in not just about changing culture, but really bring the right culture on board. I don't believe in just making sure that when they join, making sure that they follow a particular culture or something like that, but making sure that I already found the people that are already that particular culture and bringing them on board, and that makes life very easy. So when you find the right person, life is easy. When you have the wrong person and you're trying to change the person, then I think life is tough. Life is really tough. Yeah, and you get sleepless nights doing that, I feel. Yeah.
Obviously, we're in a room of hirers, firers, decision makers. I mean, when you're going through these interviews, how do you know who's going to be the right person? I mean, somebody can walk through the door, they've got a great resume, they talk well, they dress well, but how do you know that they're going to be the right fit for what you're trying to do?
Well, sometimes I do a math test. And at least I know whether the person is left brain or right brain, right? And that at least helps me. But I think that nothing can substitute time, right? And I really believe in spending time with the person that I'm speaking to, with the candidate. And I can spend a lot of time with a person. And if I'm not sure about the person, I will spend even more time. I've even invited people to my house before. Sometimes I want to meet their families too. I'm quite thorough in that sense. I want to know what the person is like. If I even have an inkling of what his personal life is like, it can help me make my decision better. And I also force the people that, so normally they'll go through 3-4 rounds, right? They'll speak to me, they'll speak to other people in my team. I also make them really be spend a lot of time. When they walk out of the interview, within 20 minutes, and they say, Jonn, really good. I say, get back in there. I don't believe that you can spend 20 minutes with a person and you know the person is the right person. right? It's like saying you date a girl for 2 weeks and you decide to marry the girl, right? I mean, it's not possible, right? So go in there and do your job, right?
I think a few celebrities might disagree on that. I think a few of them have got married after 2
Well,
weeks.
Hollywood marriages are Hollywood marriages, right? I mean, but the thing is this, like for me, nothing can substitute time. Like even in 20 minutes, you may notice some things, but you spend another 20 minutes and you learn something new again. And also sometimes my team walks in and I say yes or no, right? They say yes or no. They say 50-50. I said, screw that, go back in again, right? Never come off interviews 50-50. They go back in, spend another 20 minutes, they come out again. They say 60-40. I was like, go back in there again. You're wasting my time. What is 60-40, right? What is 60-40? It's a yes or no answer. You got to come out, you're going to give me a high five. Say, if you can high five me, we go, right? And then I speak to him. And then if I speak to him and I come out and I don't high five you back, then I say you did a bad job. Right? Why do you simply high five me? It's clearly not a high five candidate, right? So we have something called a high five candidate. And you go in, you really feel that you walk out of the room, you feel so happy. You're like, wow, I really found this guy that can, really be the one for the business. And this can be, people think that I'm talking about managerial level. I'm talking right down to exec level. I'm talking about fresh grads even. If I have to, I would speak to fresh grads sometimes because I believe that is so important, right? Bring the right fresh grads on board. It's very important. But of course, I don't go and meet the family members of our fresh graduates. That would be a bit creepy, I would say. Yeah.
But I feel like every time I speak to any kind of CEO, any founder, anybody that's running their own business, the number one thing that they say is there just aren't enough hours in the day. So how do you then find the time, obviously with you and your busy schedule, how do you find the time to spend that much time with a prospective candidate? Or is it just a case of anybody that joins the business, it's that important to know you've got the right person that I'm happy to put everything else aside?
I think I would say the first thing I would say is like, I haven't found the magic formula in work-life balance and in like work-family balance too. I mean, I admittedly I haven't found, and to be very honest, kind of like spending a lot more time in the entrepreneur circle, I know this is something that a lot of people are struggling with as well. So I must say, the magic formula has not been found. I still go home to a slightly unhappy wife sometimes. I must admit. But it is about priority. And I can say, and I wouldn't say it's just about bringing the person on board and spending the time interviewing, but also spending the time training and really spending the time with the people that come on board as well. It's also something that's very important to me. So I would spend a lot of time also teaching. I would never I don't even think no question is too silly to ask. No question, no roadblock is too difficult to ask me or too easy to ask me. So I still spend a lot of time, not just at the interviewing process or bringing them on board process, but even after I spend even more time with them, really spending one-on-one time sometimes, just going through a spreadsheet with them sometimes, just really, understanding how they think sometimes. And yes, I think sometimes it's a little bit about prioritization. And yeah, I would say still work in progress in terms of really finding the work-life balance. And sometimes I would tell my wife and say, hey, I'll be home at 9, and then I'll be home at 12. And she's like, why? And then I said, well, just as I was about to leave, someone said, hey, Jonn, can I ask you something? And that turned into a 1-hour chat. So that became 10 o'clock, right? And then just as I was about to leave, someone else pulled me again. So yeah, I would say there's no magic formula, and sometimes, that line between being accessible and being too accessible is hard to draw. And that's still something I'm working on, to be very honest. Yeah.
And particularly for you, work-life balance is a kind of a huge concept all of a sudden, because for those of you that don't know, Jonn has just had a kid. He's just become a father for the first time.
Thank you.
So yeah, how's that working out for you now? Do you find now you've got to be slightly more, no, I need to be home with my family, like I'm suddenly less accessible, or are you still figuring that out as well with balancing fatherhood and running a company?
Not easy, not easy. But I once had a mentor who taught me this is kind of like the pie chart, right? This is your time, this is the pie chart of your time, and you decide how you want to spend the time. And basically everyone has to realize that you have a pie chart, and you decide how you want to cut the pie, right? So there are generally 5-6 pieces of the pie, and for different people, there are different things, right? Some people say, okay, family is one, work is one, friends is one, religion is one, my hobbies, my reading is one, sports is one. So let's say your pie is cut that way, six slices. Okay, then, you say, okay, now I have a kid, now I have a family. How do you do it, right? I mean, something has to give, right? I mean, this is so yeah. I mean, so my pie is just shifted. So honestly, religion, very little now, unfortunately. Friends, they don't see me now. Hobbies and sport, almost none. so then it becomes really just family and work. Just my pie is quite easy now. I just slice it in half, right? No more 6 pieces anymore, right? And that's life. I mean, but does it have to be like that forever? No. I mean, over time you adjust your pie as you see fit. And this pie, I would say, is a very personalized pie. Everyone has their own pie at different stages of your life. You need to decide how to cut it. But more importantly, once you decided that this is how I'm going to slice it, you communicate it, right? A lot of people slice it and say, yeah, I keep it to myself. This is how I'm slicing it. But after you slice it, you should try and communicate it. So you tell your friends, stop bugging me, I'm not going to go out, You tell your parents, I'm not going to have as many dinners as you can, You tell your dog, sorry, no more walks for you, and stuff like that, right? You tell your pastor, I'm not seeing you for the next 6 months or something like that. But I think you have to communicate that as well so that it becomes manageable for everyone, right? So that's something that, I try and do, right? And thankfully I have an understanding wife and family, yeah.
And you've used the analogy with me before where we spoke about, okay, the similarities. Once you raised a company, now you're raising a human. It's, you mentioned that there are kind of some similarities there between, how to raise one or the other. What's your kind of, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I know, now you make me sound like a monster, raising a kid is like raising a business. But it is, I see a lot of similarities. I mean, at least I do, and I agree. I think that, when you're a baby, the baby can be unpredictable. You don't really know what the baby wants, right? It's like a company. It's starting, there's so many fires to fight. You're like panicking. You don't really know what you're doing. The baby is crying, you don't know what's going on, and you see all these issues with the company, people are coming, people are leaving, you don't even know what's going on, right? And I think that's really a very similar process, right? And then the baby grows, and then you start seeing, oh wow, baby is doing better and better, and then it start becoming predictable, it can communicate with you, you start understanding the numbers behind the company, you start saying, okay, this is what I need to do, right? If I want the baby to smile, this is what I do, right? You want the business to grow, this is what I need to do, right? So that really helps. And then you start bringing the right people into the baby's life. It's kind of like, the right teachers, the right, babysitters and stuff like that. It's like bringing the right people on the team, right, to start building the business with you. And then at some point, the business kind of gets through a certain stage. The first 12 years, it kind of goes through a teenage phase, right, which is like what Photobook is going through right now. So Photobook is a teenager right now. And teenagers are what? Teenagers can grow very fast, and this is the fastest growing stage. It's so super fun. And I think Photobook is going through a very fun stage. Everyone's having a lot of fun. But it can also be rebellious, right? It can also do a lot of things that you don't want it to do, and you can have too many options, too many guys chasing after you and stuff like that, too many doors to open, too many doors to close. And I think there's a lot of similarities, and the outcome of what we want to do, and that's at Photobook the next 5 years, is to make sure that when we hit 18, 19, we end our teenage years as a fine young gentleman or woman, and that's what we want, right? And then as when you're 18, 19, then you find a potential husband or wife, then you start thinking about M&A, right? Start thinking about potential suitors and acquisitions. So that's kind of like how we think about it. And I think there are a lot of similarities, and look at some of the companies that did M&A, like JobStreet and iProperty and stuff like that. They all hit the 18-year-old mark, It's like, hey, I'm an adult now. I'm ready for my husband and wife, And that's kind of like, true for many, many companies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or IPO, yeah.
Okay, and so finally then, if we were to talk about, okay, if people here remember nothing else from this session, if there's one kind of nugget of advice that you really want them to take away from this session, what would it be?
I think that I would trust your instinct and go for it. I think that a lot of times a lot of people get swayed by many different things, and I think that we live in a world where there's too much advice and too many things, right? But I think that as an entrepreneur or as someone who's running the business, you can trust your instinct. I think that a lot of times our business instincts are quite accurate, right? Forget the spreadsheet sometimes, I think that there are a lot of people who look at spreadsheets, forget what your mom tells you, don't do this, don't do that, become a good accountant or lawyer. Or also forget sometimes what you read on LinkedIn, for example. I know some people will tell me, some CEOs, they would change the business strategy every day because there's a new article on LinkedIn telling you this is what you need to do, right? And they say, oh yeah, I need to listen to this article, right? Read this article and I should trust it. And they're changing business strategies way too often based on what they read and based on what they see. And that's also very bad, right? But I would say that, just go for it, and trust your instincts. And more often than not all the time, more often than not, I think that an instinct of a business leader, just like an instinct of a father, is usually quite accurate. It's like you kind of like instinctively know what your baby wants, what your kid wants. And I think that as a business leader, as a business owner, you sometimes instinctively know what you need to do to actually grow the business and the right medicine to give the business and stuff like that, right? So I would say, and then just do it, right? Just do it. Forget about what what sometimes people tell you, and just go for it, right? And I think that, just like how as a parent, you wouldn't let any other person tell you what to do too. You instinctively know what to do and you just do it. Yeah.
So your advice is don't listen to anyone else's advice.
Well, I mean, take it with a grain of salt, but I would say trust your instincts. And I think a lot of people sometimes, when you're growing, when you're doing very well, you trust your instincts. You're like, yes, I'm doing so well, so I'm at the top of the world, and you trust your instincts too much. And then when they don't do well, and when business is, dips, and that happens to everyone, it happens to everyone, that sometimes business doesn't do as well, and then you stop trusting your instinct. You're like, now I'm not sure anymore. You lose confidence, you don't trust your instinct. And then you start listening to a lot of people, you start doing a lot of mistakes, you start making a lot of mistakes. And I've seen many times, like, this is actually when things can start going downhill, right? You stop trusting your own instincts, you start listening to other people, and even worse, you start bringing on board the wrong people as well, because you start thinking, I have to make these major changes, and that can bring about a lot of chaos and a lot of stress to the business sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your insight, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.